18, or D&C 135, context. 135, who wrote 135? Most likely, we don't know for sure. There's no authorship ever attached to it. But who do we think it is? We think it's John Taylor. Pretty sure it's John. Eyewitness. This is now Joseph is dead. So we need to get the context. The context is the full story of what happened, right? That leads up to section 135. Did Joseph anticipate his own martyrdom? Did he know it would happen? And if so, how far in advance? We have verses like this in section 6, where the Savior said to both him and Oliver Cowdery, "They can do no more unto you than they did unto me. And even if they do unto you as they've done unto me, blessed are ye, for ye shall dwell with me in glory." That's our first little allusion to. That is a possibility. In Liberty Jail, he told some of the brethren there, Lyman White recalls, that he would not live to see 40 years, but that Lyman was not to speak of it until Joseph was dead. Mother Smith remembered also in Missouri that she received a promise that in 5 years Joseph would have power over all his enemies, 1839. She did not anticipate his premature death, but when it occurred, she wrote, "The time had elapsed and the promise was fulfilled." And Lucy Walker, one of his plural wives, said that Joseph told her that I have the promise of life for 5 years if I listen to the voice of the Spirit. So 5 years from Liberty Jail. So that would be about March, April, 1844 would be time's up, and he'll die in June. And so let's talk about what happens building up to that. I will teach that there are 4 factors that lead to his martyrdom, 4 things that happen that if they did not happen, then I don't think he would have been martyred. But because all 4 happened, it happened. They are: number 1, the introduction of plural marriage. Number 2, the apostasy of key individuals. Number 3, Joseph's candidacy for the United States presidency. And number 4, the destruction of the Nauvoo expositor. Let's dive in. Number 1, the introduction of plural marriage. Joseph said of plural marriage, quote, "I shall die for it," close quote. Listen to Joseph's anxiety in this. You guys talked about the tension off camera. We're talking about the challenge, the real life challenge of Joseph being between God on the one hand and his sensitivities and feelings of his wife on the other hand. They talk about a rock and a hard spot. Listen to this quote from Joseph. He says, "They accuse me of polygamy and of being a false prophet. But I am no false prophet. I'm no imposter. I have had no dark revelations. I have had no revelations from the devil. I have made up no revelations. The same God that has thus far dictated and directed me and inspired me and strengthened me in this work gave me this revelation and commandment on celestial and plural marriage. And the same God commanded me to obey it. He said to me that unless I accept it and introduce it and practice it, I, together with my people, should be damned and cut off from this time henceforth. And they," Joseph's enemies, said, "If I do it, they're going to kill me. What shall I do? What shall I do? If I do not practice it, I shall be damned with all my people. If I do teach and practice it and urge it, they say they'll kill me, and I know they will." But we've got to observe it. There's an eternal principle, and it was given to me by way of commandment and not by way of instruction. Oh, gosh.
What is the reference there?
That reference is the, I will show you. This is a great little resource here. There.
Go over your screen and that exit.
Yeah.
There you are. Oh, back again. Back again. There it is. Exit. Press escape. Press escape now. Now swipe over.
Alright, so it's not going there. So if you go to the.org, go to, let's see, actually go to Scripture Commentary, D&C 135, Teachings on Martyrdom. go to outline the 4 factors leading to martyrdom, what I'm talking to you about right now.
Can you read that, Holmes?
Oh, yeah, right there. So here's the full account. This is why I didn't put it in the PowerPoint this morning. It's Denison L. Harris, a verbal statement he gave to Bishop Denison L. Harris, from him to President Joseph F. Smith, in the presence of Elder Franklin Spencer, probably Spencer, at the house of Bishop Dorius of Ephraim, Sanpete County, Utah, 1881, late reminiscence. Joseph told him not to tell that until after Joseph was dead. No, until after, you gotta read the full account. The full account is when these 2 boys, Denison L. Harris and Robert Scott, were invited by William Law and some of the apostates into a secret meeting against Joseph Smith where they were planning on killing him. And people were putting their hands on the Bible and swearing that they would not rest until Joseph's blood was spilled. And Joseph had sent them to that meeting as spies for him. He said, I want you to go to those meetings. There was like 2 or 3 of those meetings. The 3rd meeting, Joseph, before they went, they came and met with Joseph, and Joseph said, I think they're going to come to some resolution at this meeting. Do not make an oath, whatever you do. Do not make any vows. If they kill you, I'll be like a lion in their path. If you have to die, die like me. But I don't think they're going to kill you. Okay. And so they went to the meeting. Sure enough, they were making vows, putting hands in the Bible, saying that they're going to not rest till Joseph. Everyone in the room had made the oath except for these 2 boys. And all eyes were on them. What will you do? And they're like, we're not making any oaths. And they're like, hey, you know way too much information. We can't let you go without making the oath. Either you make the oath or we kill you. And they said, we can't make the oath. They're like, all right. Down to the cellar you go. Down at bayonet point, they went down to the, or like Bowie knife maybe, down to the cellar. Someone shouted out like a pirate, dead men tell no tales. Stuff like that. That's actually a direct quote. It's a long account, but where is that? Yeah.
Right there.
Dead men tell no tales. They gathered around us. They threatened. They perceived that we could not be frightened into it. Trying to scare them into like, okay, we'll make the oath. It wouldn't work. And they say, boys, do as we've done. You are young. You will not have anything to do in this affair, but we want that you should keep it a secret and act with us. We then told them that we positively could not. They said if we did not yield to their requirement, they would have to shed our blood. And they went so far as to start us down the stairs in charge of 2 armed guards and bayonets. And William Wilson Law and all these guys would force them down to the cellar. And then finally, one person cries out, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Let's talk this matter over. And they said that undoubtedly their fathers know where they are, and if they go missing, people are going to come try and find these boys. And as a result, maybe our whole thing would be, foiled. And so they just said, hey, if you tell anyone, we're going to feel it our duty to kill you. Got it? We're like, got it. Right, get out of here. So they run. They go find Joseph, who was hiding by the river. Joseph beckoned us to him. They turned back where we were yet watching and listening to us. And one of us said, let's go down to the river. The guard made an answer and said, yeah, you better go to the river. This we started off and ran past where Brother Joseph was. Brother John Scott was with him, one of his bodyguards. They slipped around the bank, came down the same point where we were. These men, the guard, went back. We walked down the river in peace, nearly a quarter of a mile opposite Joseph, so they couldn't see. Anyway, they sit down. Joseph says, boys, we saw the danger you in. We were afraid you'd not get out alive. We're thankful you got off. He then asked us to tell him what we heard. When we told him what we heard, he says, oh, brethren, you do not know what this will terminate in. He looked very solemn, not being able to control himself. He broke right out. Brother Scott rose and putting his arm around Brother Joseph's neck said, oh, Brother Joseph, you think they're going to kill you? And they fell on each other's necks and wept bitterly for some time. We all wept. After Joseph recovered himself, Brother Johns repeated the same question. Brother Joseph lifted Brother arm's off from his neck and said, I fully comprehend. But he would not say he was going to be killed. But he said in the conversation, I'm going to leave you and I'm not going to be with you very long. It will not be many months until I shall have to go. He says, Brother Joseph, you're going to be slain. He never answered. He felt very sorrowful. There's one thing Joseph said that I haven't related to you, Joseph F. Smith. He said, there's the quote I just shared with you. It's from those boys who were very, very invested in this and saw Joseph at his most vulnerable condition. And so, late reminiscence, yeah. Did he say exactly those words? Maybe not. But I believe that they're telling the truth as far as that's the sentiment. Rock in a hard place.
Thanks for the context on that contextual quote.
Yeah. Number 2, apostasy of key individuals. You can already see how that's going to play in this. Joseph says, all the enemies upon the face of the earth may roar and exert all their power to bring about my death, but they can accomplish nothing unless some who are among us join with our enemies. Turn our virtues into faults, and by falsehood and deceit stir up their wrath and indignation against us, and bring their united vengeance upon our heads. Then that would work. Brigham Young said, Joseph said to me in Kirtland, Brother Brigham, if I was to reveal to this people what the Lord has revealed to me, there's not a man or woman that would stay with me. Did Joseph already know about polygamy at that time? I don't know if he was talking about that or not. Might have been one of the things.
When was that quote? Do you know?
Kirtland.
Oh, Kirtland.
He said Kirtland.
Oh.
I recollect, said George Q. Cannon, who would have been a teenager at the time, hearing Joseph make a remark from the stand which made a deep impression on my mind at the time. He said that if he were to reveal unto the people the principles and the doctrines which God had revealed unto him, there were men upon the stand that would go around the streets of the city seeking to shed his blood. Not many months elapsed before I comprehended his words, for soon afterwards one of the men who sat on the stand and heard that declaration and whose name he mentioned went about the city plotting to shed his blood. Who was that? William Law. You remember William Law? It was his second counselor. William's son Richard was present at this time, about 1842. He related an incident to Joseph McMurrin, who summarized it this way. So, third hand. Sorry. William Law, with his arms around the neck of the prophet, was pleading with him to withdraw the doctrine of plural marriage, which he had at that time commenced to teach to some of the brethren. Mr. Law predicted that if Joseph would abandon that doctrine, Mormonism would, in 50 or 100 years, dominate the Christian world. Mr. Law pleaded for this with tears streaming from his eyes. The prophet was also in tears, but he informed the gentleman that he could not withdraw the doctrine, for God had commanded him to teach it, and condemnation would come upon him if he was not obedient to the commandment. Later on he said about William, we have a Judas in our midst. My life is more in danger from some little doughhead of a fool, you remember this quote, than from outside people. I'm exposed to far greater danger from traitors among ourselves than from enemies without. The doughhead quote. George A. Smith says, by the way, I just heard this, I just have to say this. There's a group of people in the church. I just talked with one 2 weeks ago, who believes that Joseph is a true prophet, but he got polygamy wrong. That was not at all a true revelation. They liken it to blacks in the priesthood, which we'll talk about the problems with that in a minute, but in our next segment. I talked to him after church, because he said this in a church class. I talked to him after church. I was like, tell me about that. How do you reconcile that? He's like, well, I mean, I just think when men get power, they just abuse it. I think that's all that happens. So from learning, go walking through this history, what do you guys think?
It was a terribly inconvenient revelation.
It's like one of the worst. Yeah. Well, he knew it was leading to his death. Yeah. It's almost like, potentially you could see in some ways, almost destroys Mormonism. It almost, he is very certain, right? He is convinced. Joseph is convinced this is from God, right? Stories like that, and with him and himself, you've seen some of the things he said. Anyway, Joseph said, I might live as Caesar might have lived, were it not for a right-hand Brutus. And the illustration of that saying is most clearly shown by William Law's operations in bringing about the murder of the prophet. The men who were in his bosom, shared his confidence, and professed to be his warmest and best friends, were the men to treacherously shed his blood. William Law actually tried a few different times. One time he offered Joseph H. Jackson $500 to kill Joseph. 18th of April 1844, he says that I put pistols in my pockets one night and I went to Joseph Smith's house, determined to blow his infernal brains out, but I could not get the opportunity to shoot him. But I'm determined I will shoot him. The first opportunity, and you'll see blood and thunder and devastation in this place. April 1844, he was drunk. He tried to shoot Joseph, but his gun misfired. You may know that story. Super cool story. You should tell your students. You know the story I'm talking about?
Mm-mm.
A guy named Charles Stoddard, 14-year-old kid. Joseph asked him to be a spy for him. He says, I need you to be a spy for me. You just go like chop wood, be a houseboy for William Law. He said, yes, sir. So he said, just listen in on his conversations and just come back and report from time to time what you hear from him. So he did. And one evening, William was talking with all his buddies, polishing his gun and stuff. He's talking about how he could kill Joseph. They're drinking real big. And he finally tells William, kicks him, wakes him up, or not William, Charles. He's like, Charles, get up. Get my gun. I want you to polish my gun real good. Fix it real good. So that I can shoot Joe Smith. I'm going to go shoot Joe Smith with it. He's like, yes, sir. And he gets it all polished and ready. He's like, okay, now go get Joseph. Go get him. Go get him for me, boy. So Charles runs down the street, knocks on Joseph Smith's door at the mansion house. It's not very far away from William Law's house. And knocks on the door. Joseph answers. He says, it was dawn, right as the sun was starting to come up. He said, Joseph, William said, I'm supposed to come get you because he wants to shoot you, and I don't think you should go, but he wants you to come to his house. And Joseph says, that's all right, I'll come with you. He's like, no, I said he's going to shoot you. And he's like, it's all right. He said they started walking toward William Law's house. Charles was about to pass out because it kept going through his mind. I just polished the gun that's going to be used to kill the prophet Joseph. Joseph, sensing that, looks at Charles and says, Charles, William Law may someday kill me, but it won't be today. And he goes, William comes out, staggering out, drunken. He's like, you wanted to see me, Mr. Law? He's like, yeah, I'm going to do the whole world a favor and take care of Joe Smith. That's his gun. Joseph unbuttons his shirt in the story. It's like, goes like that. He's like, I'm ready now, Mr. Law. At this point, Charles about passes out. It's like, ah! And he's like, go ahead. William Law staggers back, points right at Joseph's chest, pulls the trigger. Nothing. First sound was a profanity word coming out of William Law's mouth. And he looks at little Charles. He's like, you fixed my gun so it wouldn't go up. In those days, I have to explain to my students, fix means broke. You fixed my gun so it wouldn't go off. And then he's like, no, I probably. And Joseph, to take the attention away from Charles, like, the problem's not with the gun, William. It's like, Charles, see that can on the ground? Grab that can, put it up on that fence post. So he's like, yes, sir. Grateful for the attention to be away from him. Puts the can up on the fence post, and he's like, go ahead, take a shot. William Law turns it out, streaks right through the center of the can. Joseph looks over at Charles, gives him a meaningful look, buttons his shirt back up, and says, if you're done with me this morning, William, Emma has some things I need to do about the house. Then he walks back. That's a sweet story. Charles' mom recorded that story. Her name's Sarah Woodward Stoddard.
Nice.
Not related. But that's on my website, so you can check that out. Spring 1844. That's when he starts holding those secret meetings with over 200 people who sign a secret oath not to eat or sleep until Joseph's dead. That's the one that those boys were invited to. So he's actively, this is the president, hiring. He's the first presidency plotting the death, right? Yeah.
So wait, he's still in the presidency?
Was, yeah. So he
What
gets
point?
excommunicated at this point, yeah.
When?
I don't know the date of his excommunication. But I believe he was excommunicated for, ironically, wait for it, drum roll, adultery. What's his biggest beef with Joseph?
Polygamy?
Yeah.
So
Then
it's before 1844 though?
Yeah.
Like before
Yeah, I
all.
think, I'm sure you can look that up.
Oh, yeah.
Wikipedia, William Law, yeah. John C. Bennett. John C. Bennett, we talked about him, ingratiated himself into the trust of the prophet. I shared this with you previously, with section 124. He had heard wind of the doctrine of plural marriage, but Joseph never explained it to him. He came up with his own version, started illicitly using his position the very thing that people would accuse Joseph of doing, he was actually doing, right? That's John C. Bennett. Disgraced, discharged, excommunicated. After that, goes on a preaching tour, whipping everyone up in a frenzy in the surrounding towns. I think Carthage was influenced by him as well as others. Here's another, just kind of their positions. These people will all turn against Joseph and plot his death. Nauvoo High Council member, Brigadier General. Yeah. This is bad, guys. This is really bad. There's a Judas in our midst. Or 4 Judases. Judai.
Or Wilson and William Brothers.
Yep. Third, his candidacy for the U.S. presidency.
Scott.
Yeah.
Looks like they tried to remove him on January 8th, 1844, but because there's kind of like some weird procedure, he was granted a rehearing on April 18th, 1844, and at that
So
point
he's
he was
still
officially
actively
removed. So
On
he's
the
like
18th.
kind of like on probation between January and April 18th, is what Wikipedia's saying.
Okay. And April 18th was when he put pistols in his pockets to go blow his infernal brains out. That makes sense. Interesting.
probably good.
He was excommunicated.
The day he was excommunicated officially. Cool, thanks for connecting that. Awesome. Why did Joseph run for U.S. president? Because on November 29, 1839, Joseph met with and sought help from President Martin Van Buren to receive redress for their unlawful losses in Missouri. Showed some sympathy, but ultimately was not helpful. Joseph and Elias Higbee stayed 2 months in the East, trying to gain support from senators and representatives who might be willing to help the Saints. Nothing. February 1840, they again met with President Van Buren. The president treated them rudely and declared, "Gentlemen, your cause is just, but I can do nothing for you. If I take up for you, I shall lose the vote of Missouri." 1844 is an election year. On November 4th, 1843, Joseph wrote letters to the presidential candidates John Calhoun, Lewis Cass, Richard Johnson, Henry Clay, and Martin Van Buren. Each letter described the persecutions the Mormons had suffered at the hands of the Missourians and asked their pointed question, "What will be your rule of action relative to us as a people?" Only Calhoun, Cass, and Clay responded to Joseph Smith's letters, and they expressed little sympathy for the cause of the Saints. January 29, 1844, with the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and others, it was unanimously decided that Joseph Smith would run for President of the United States on an independent platform. You can still buy their t-shirts today if you like. He hesitantly said that Sidney Rigdon could be his vice president.
He is prophetic because look how many stars are on that flag years before. That's
prophetic.
Yeah, right there you
go. Here's his political platform, because I know you're wondering. He thought that it would be a good idea to give the U.S. president full power to send an army to suppress mobs without requiring the governor of the state to make a demand. You can understand why he might have thought that would be a good idea. Eliminating slavery by purchasing all slaves from their masters with the sale of public lands and by reducing the salary of members of Congress. That should do it. Should give us enough money to buy all the slaves. Masters are well paid for, which is their number one concern. Done. And emancipate them. Yeah, who else had that idea? John Quincy Adams talks about this. I'm trying to remember. If it was that Abraham Lincoln's platform as well? I don't think so. Can't remember. But some genius, like 20 years later, is like, you know what we should do? And Quincy Adams was like, that was Joseph Smith's platform. Quincy Adams is not quite. It's not John Quincy Adams. It's John Quincy Adams is
Too earlier, right?
relative.
He's already been president at this point. I think.
Yeah. Anyway, he has a great article where he met Joseph, spent a day with him in Nauvoo. He doesn't quite know what to do with Joseph, the puzzle of Joseph Smith. And in that, he's like, man, Joseph's platform was pretty awesome. And all these years later, look what we could have avoided had this been followed. He also believed that we should reduce congressional pay from $8 to $2 a day. He favored extensive prison reform, forming a national bank and annexing Oregon and Texas. He favored extending the United States from the east to the West Sea, but only if Native Americans gave their consent. Manifest Destiny.
Are you thinking of Josiah Quincy?
Josiah Quincy. Yes,
Boston.
that's the one.
There you go.
Mayor of Boston. He becomes later. That for me is
I think
Joseph.
you got it.
Thank you. And he's related to John Quincy
Yes.
Adams somehow. Yeah, I figured it. Thanks. Not a son, because the last name's different.
No, probably relative and
Oh,
in-law.
I see.
Yeah.
Because the Quincy was probably an in-law.
That's right. Anyway, there's a lot more than this, but Joseph for president. Here's his running competition. James Polk will win that election. You know why Joseph Smith didn't win that election?
Because he
Because
died.
he died. That's right. It was held in November. He died in June. Joseph says, persecution is rolled upon our heads from time to time, from portions of the United States like peals of thunder, because of our religion. And no portion of the government as yet has stepped forward for our relief. And in view of these things, I feel it to be my right and privilege to obtain what influence and power I can, lawfully, in the United States for the protection of injured innocents. And if I lose my life in a good cause, I'm willing to be sacrificed on the altar of virtue, righteousness, and truth, in maintaining the laws and Constitution of the United States, if need be, for the general good of mankind. How would his running for president, how would he connect that to his death? Listen to this. Apparently he already knew there were some shenanigans underway.
Southwick.
Dr. Wall Southwick, hope you're not related, reported that he attended a
Southwick.
meeting in Carthage. What's that?
Bad Southwick.
Oh yeah, Bass. With delegates from every state in the Union except 3, including Governor Thomas Ford of Illinois, wherein they considered, quote, the best way to stop Joseph Smith's career as his views on government were widely circulated and took like wildfire. People loved his platform. They said if he did not get into the presidential chair this election, he would be sure to the next time. They were threatened by him. And if Illinois and Missouri would join together and kill him, they would not be brought to justice for it.
Who reported this in the history of the church? Oh, okay, can you tell us about him?
I don't know anything about it.
Oh.
But I would look here, I bet you there's a footnote on his name. Maybe if even Joseph Smith Papers might have something. Brigham Young says, every state of this union was involved in the killing of Joseph Smith. Maybe that's what he was referring to, this meeting. I don't know. In Doctrine and Covenants 136, just to flash forward a little bit, here's what the Lord told Brigham Young. The nation that has driven you out killed the prophets. Not just a ragtag bunch of guys with black faces in Carthage, but this was like a conspiracy. And they have shed innocent blood, which crieth from the ground against them. Thomas Ford was in on it. He was in on it. He was the one that pledged that Joseph would be safe if he went to Carthage. And then he deliberately withdraws without taking Joseph and Hiram with him, which he said he would do. He says, if I leave Carthage, I'll bring you with me. He leaves them to the wolves. So he's absolutely, his hands are dripping with blood. Number 4, the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor. Here's the Nauvoo Expositor. Pretty dense sheet there. That's how they would do it back in the day, really tight letters. It was published its first and only copy on June 7th, 1844, the month Joseph dies. The publishers include William Law, Wilson Law, Charles I. Entrepreneur, those guys. They had a threefold attack on Joseph. Number 1, he's a fallen prophet. They said the church was true once, but since introducing such doctrines as the plurality of wives, plurality of gods, and sealing into eternal life, Joseph has become a fallen prophet. They said that Joseph Smith had combined church and state and abused the right of habeas corpus and overstepped his bounds with his views on his powers and candidacy for the presidency. And he was a womanizer. They said Joseph had taught secretly and denied openly the doctrine of plural marriage, by which young foreign girls were brought thousands of miles to America and then told to submit their own will to God's for the gratification of the prophet and his followers. So he's already begun there, that out of context. So easy that one to take out of context. Were there saints that were gathering from England? Yeah. Across the ocean? Did any of them end up ever being Joseph's plural wife? We'd have to look at that, I don't know for sure, but that could be the case. Here's a quote from that Nauvoo Expositor. We are earnestly seeking to explode the vicious principles of Joseph Smith and those who practice the same abominations and whoredoms. Joseph Smith is, quote, one of the blackest and basest scoundrels that has appeared upon the stage of human existence since the days of Nero and Caligula. and his followers are heaven-daring, hell-deserving, God-forsaken villains. On June 10th, the Nauvoo City Council decides to have the expositor destroyed as a public nuisance. This is within the parameters of the powers granted by the Nauvoo Charter, which the apostates hated. So they did. 2 days later, Thomas Sharp, enemy of the church, news author for the Warsaw Signal. He explodes. War and termination is inevitable. Citizens, arise, one and all. Can you stand by and suffer such infernal devils to rob men of their property and rights without avenging them? We have not time for comment. Every man will make his own. Let it be made with powder and ball. So the stage is set. So were they within their legal rights to destroy the Nauvoo expositor? Yeah. Was that the best idea? Well, it gave them legal right now to arrest Joseph. Right. What law could that maybe be seen as breaking?
Freedom of speech?
Freedom of speech.
Press.
Freedom of press. Yep. They call it a public nuisance, which in their charter, I think it says somewhere there that public nuisances can be removed by the council, whatever that might mean. They declare this public nuisance, therefore they're justified, but what about when those rights of freedom of press and public nuisance clash, then it's like, now we've got a court case. So that gives the pretext to arrest him, get him in custody. Plural marriage, apostates within, U.S. presidency, and the destruction of the Nauvoo expositor. Those four combine now to lead to Carthage. Carthage happens here. 12th through the 22nd, there's an outcry that Joseph and Hiram must be brought to justice and must be tried in a court in Carthage. Thomas Ford obliges the public. Saturday the 22nd, after a tearful farewell to their families, Porter Rockwell rose, Joseph Smith, Hiram Smith, and Willard Richards across Mississippi to stay briefly at home of a friend. They intend to head toward the west. They say, Joseph says, I know what to do. We'll go west. Me and Hiram, they only want us. Me and Hiram, Willard Richards didn't really want him, but we'll go to the west, and we will go to the Rocky Mountains, and there we will prepare a place for you. We will send when it's time for the saints to come. This is only going to end badly if we go along with it. Then the letter showed up. What letter was it? Hiram says, let's just go back. It was a letter, so Reynolds Cahoon was kind of ticked at this, them leaving, and he said, look at the cowards go. He asked, Reynolds Cahoon asked Emma to write a letter asking them to come back because he knew that they would listen to her. So she does. Hiram says, let's do it. Joseph says that. If Hiram and I are ever taken by our enemies, we will be massacred, or I am not a prophet of God, he had also said. Sunday, June 23rd, posse arrives at Nauvoo to arrest Joseph and Hiram. They threaten destruction of the saints in the city, and so the saints call for Joseph to return. They couldn't believe that they only wanted Joseph and Hiram. His reply was, if my life is of no value to my friends, it is of no value to me. I will die for sure if I come back. They're asking me to come back, so basically they're asking me to die. Okay. I thought they would have wanted me alive, my friends. Right? Kind of hear the wrestle there. Hiram attends the wedding of his daughter, Lovina, to Lord Walker. They come back. He's able to see his daughter get wedded. That's great. Joseph tells Hiram to go to Cincinnati. He says, Joseph, I can't leave you. He's like, go. He's like, I'm not leaving you. He's like, go. I can't. Hiram, he says, in the name of Jesus Christ, I am never going to leave your side. Joseph struggles with that for a minute and then says, amen. So it is. June 24th, 6:30 a.m., Joseph, Hiram, John Taylor, Willard Richards, and 15 other members of the city council and friends leave for Carthage voluntarily to meet in court on charges related to the destruction of the Nauvoo expositor. Joseph gives some of his last statements in Nauvoo. Here they are. Dan Jones remembered him saying, he said, there were hundreds gathered before the mansion house early in the morning. In their midst, with head erected, towering above the rest, the prophet stood gazing alternately on the devoted city and on its much-loved citizens. In suspense, he listened to the entreaties of the throng not to give himself up or he would be murdered. A few bravo-hearted men proposed to escort him, where he would find the protection denied him by the Christians among the red pagans of the West. Let's go west. Others up north would have him go, while another proffered him a safe passage on a steamboat, then ready by to whithersoever he would. A smile of approbation lit up the seer's countenance. His lovely boys, hanging on his skirts, cried, "Father, oh father, don't go to Carthage. They will kill you." A volley of arguments more powerful yet from the streaming eyes of her he loved best, and whose embrace was hard to sever. He stood erect like a beacon among roaring breakers, his gigantic mind grasping. Okay, it's a little hagiographic, as far as his gigantic mind grasping still higher. The fire flashed in his eye. With hand uplifted on high, he spoke. "My friends, nay, dearer still, my brethren, I love you. I love the city of Nauvoo too well to save my life at your expense. If I go not to them, they will come and act out the horrid Missouri scenes in Nauvoo. I may prevent it. I fear not death. My work is well nigh done. Keep the faith, and I will die for Nauvoo." So said the prophet as he mounted his steed, and together with his brother Hiram and some 30 or 40 more who chose to follow, they ascended the hill. When near the sacred spot, the temple, he paused. He looked with admiration first on that, and then on the city ere it receded from view in the flats below, and remarked, "This is the loveliest place and the best people under the heavens. Little do they know the trials that await them." To a group of assembled saints of the temple, he then says, "If I don't go, the result will be the destruction of this city and its inhabitants. I cannot think of my dear brothers and sisters and their children suffering the scenes of Missouri again in Nauvoo. It's better for your brother Joseph to die for his brothers and sisters, for I am willing to die for them. My work is finished." So off they rode on their noble steeds toward Carthage. When they got within about 4 miles of Carthage, they saw a party of about 60 men off in the distance. Those men rode up. And he says it was, they're commanded by Captain Dunn. When they hove in sight, Mr. Smith halted his steed in the midst of the road and said, "Brethren, you've come far enough," those 30, 40 men that were with him. "You've come far enough, do not further expose your lives. Stand aloof, let all their vengeance be wreaked upon my head. I am going like a lamb to the slaughter with a conscience void of offense." These 60+ men were Governor Ford's soldiers coming for him. They had orders from Ford for him to return to Nauvoo and have Joseph tell everyone in Nauvoo to surrender all their guns of the Nauvoo Legion. So he rides back, tells his family goodbye one more time. Then as he's riding by the Masonic Hall, he shouts out to some men there, "Boys, if I don't come back, take care of yourselves. I'm going like a lamb to the slaughter." He stopped by his farm and he looked at it several times. He said, "If some of you had got such a farm and knew you wouldn't see it anymore, you'd want to take a good look at it for the last time." Then they rode out. They arrived at Carthage about midnight. They're paraded before the troops, shouting vile, vulgar insults, death threats, etc. 4 p.m. on the 25th, preliminary hearing before Robert F. Smith, leader of an anti-Mormon party. Joseph and Hiram falsely charged with riot. They were acquitted. But to retain them in Carthage, they were charged with treason. And they were illegally jailed. I think treason requires, for some reason that was able to hold them, I can't remember the legal reason, whereas riot was not. Carthage jail. Y'all been there? First night, Tuesday evening, Dan Jones is with him. Amusing conversation on various interesting topics, engaged until late. After prayer, which made Carthage prison into a gate of heaven for a while, we lay promiscuously on the floor. The last words spoken were by the prophet. "For the most intelligent dream tonight, brethren." Wednesday, June 26th. A portion of us were alternately preaching to the guards, at which the prophet, patriarch, and all took turns. Several guards were relieved before their time was out because they admitted they were proselyted to the belief of the innocency of the prisoners, which rendered them incompetent of guarding. Frequently, they admitted they had been imposed upon by the tales of the mob. More than once it was heard, "Let us go home, boys, for I will not fight against these men." It was last night. Joseph bore a powerful testimony to the guards of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon, the restoration of the gospel, the administration of angels, and that the kingdom of God was again upon the earth, for the sake of which he was at that time incarcerated in that prison, and not because he had violated any law of God or man. That night, he gives a prophecy to Dan Jones. You familiar with this prophecy? They were laying on the ground. There was a gunshot. Gunshot heard outside. They lay down on the floor. It was about midnight.
At this point, are they in the jail or are they in the jailers?
Jailers.
With the bed and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that. Okay.
They laid on the floor, so they wouldn't be by the window at all. Joseph put his arm out for Dan Jones to sleep on.
And Dan Jones was a little guy, from what I've been told.
I'm not sure.
A little guy. Yeah.
I believe.
A little Welsh guy.
Yeah. I think there was a man on each side using Joseph's biceps as pillows. As they're laying there, Dan thought that Joseph was asleep until he heard this whisper in his ear. Are you afraid to die, Brother Jones? He said, I was kind of startled by the question. And he said, I responded, has that time come, think you, Brother Joseph? Joseph paused, and then he said, or no, Dan paused and said, engaged in such a cause as this, death would have few terrors, Joseph. Joseph said, you're not going to die, Dan. You're going to go, you're going to preach in Wales, and thousands of people will come into this church because of your preaching. You're not going to die. He's like the poster child of missionary work and TC. This is then preach my gospel, right? It's like, sure enough, like thousands of people joined the church. They're one of the greatest missionaries as far as like, if you want to count numbers of converts, during that era. Martyrdom Day, 27th June 1844. One of Joseph's friends, Cyrus Wheelock, brings in a gun. He's like, just in case. Smuggles in a gun, 6-shooter. There's some artwork that's got this right. They got the gun right there in the pocket. Good job. Literally, he had a gun. It was loaded. When the door, or when Hiram was shot through the door, and Joseph held him and said what he said about dear brother Hiram. Willard Richards says the next move he made was he got up, pulled the gun out, went to the door, reached around, and snapped several rounds into the mob, which caused them to retreat a bit. Legend says 2 or 3 of the guys got hit and died. Several of the rounds misfired. But of course no one would admit to the death. That would mean they admitted to being there and they admitted to being part of the mob. It's an illegal thing, so. He did fire that gun. Apparently it hit some guys. But that was after Hiram had been shot in the face. You've been there, you know about the bullet hole. John Taylor, the watch. Nobody knows the truth about the watch. They tried like Mythbusters on watches like that with similar guns at that time period and shot them, and then the watch is like shattered to pieces. Like, they don't just like break the face, and so nobody knows exactly. Maybe he was hit, fell down, and that's what broke the face of it. Who knows? Who knows? But there's like an indentation of like where a ball seemed to have struck. So maybe it was, go with your own theory. Not as much powder in the gun.
Misfired, right?
This was a misfire.
How about
It was a BB gun. It was,
divine intervention?
oh, come on. Angel slows it down just enough. Don't know. John's there. Willard's there. Largest target, Willard Richards, right? Over like it's like 200 and something, maybe almost 300 pounds. Ooh. Largest target. What's amazing about that?
Not touched.
Not even, well, he's touched next to his ear,
Yeah.
and a few drops of blood fall, that's it. But a year earlier-ish, Joseph had made a prophecy about him, right? Saying, Brother Willard, the day will come when you will see your friends fall on your right hand and on your left. You'll be in a hailstorm of balls, like from guns, and you won't get hit. He didn't say you won't get hit. Not a ball will pierce your garments or your robes, something like And he said, do you believe it? And Brother Richard said, no. He said, why not? And he said, because I've been in a hailstorm lots of times and I always get hit. Joseph just smiled. He's like, all right, you'll see. Didn't hit his robes at all. No hole in the garment. Nicked his ear. That's it. Second window, the fall. You know, you can add lots of good stuff to this, right? But see the cotton that was stuck into the wound, right in the death mask. Section 135, what does John Taylor say?
No man saved.
What's your favorite verse in this section? We won't do all the verses, let's just do one or two. Give me a favorite. Section 135. What's that?
Verse 3 is good.
3, go.
Joseph Smith, the prophet and seer of the Lord, has done more save Jesus only for the salvation of men in this world than any other man that ever lived in it.
That's good. Awesome. Any others?
I like the end of 6.
Go for it.
They lived for glory, they died for glory, and glory is their eternal reward. For age to age, your name shall go down. To posterity is gems for the sanctified.
True or false, does that happen? Absolutely. Their names are highest, held in highest regard by those that love them. End of 3. In life they were not divided, and in death they were not separated. Speaking of Joseph and Hiram, lived great, died great. Someone mentioned that this should have been Joseph and who?
Oliver.
Oliver Cowdery. Here's just an interesting historical note on that. When Joseph they were down by the river in Nauvoo doing baptisms for the dead. Oliver Cowdery had defected by that point. After Joseph baptized Hiram in the river, we don't know for whom, he said, quote, "Today I weld the link of priesthood that was broken by Oliver Cowdery. For in life we shall be one, and in death we shall not be separated," he says to his brother, according to John Riggs. Well, you'll do wonderful things with section 135. There's a ton of history that builds up to this. I think really sad, but also section 136 says don't be sad. It needed to happen. Section. It was to seal. It was to seal the testimony of this book and the Book of Mormon. This was the last section, right, placed in there. Or was, I think, in John's mind, maybe supposed to be. The Doctrine and Covenants 1844 edition was just about ready for publication. So this would be the very last section of the Doctrine and Covenants. Okay, that's the end of section 135.